Hey there, welcome to Bread Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The invisible threads the dense Amazon rainforest breathed around Maria Rodriguez. Its humid air clinging to her skin like a second layer. Sweat traced delicate paths down her neck, mixing with the fine dust that seemed to permeate everything. Her research station, a modest collection of weathered tents and scientific equipment, stood as a fragile human outpost against the overwhelming green wilderness. At 35, Maria had dedicated her life to understanding the complex ecosystems of the Amazon, a passion that had driven her far from the comfortable laboratories of Sao Paulo. Her latest project focused on the intricate relationships between indigenous communities and their environmental systems, a study that her father, Pablo Rodriguez, had initially dismissed as romantic idealism. The water shortage in the small indigenous settlement of Terra Nova had become her primary concern. For weeks, she had documented the devastating impact of prolonged drought, watching how the delicate balance of community survival was being systematically dismantled by climate changes. Each day brought new challenges, children with parched lips, elders making impossible choices about water distribution, the land itself cracking under the relentless sun. Carlitos, an 8-year-old boy from the community, had become her unexpected ally. His bright eyes and sharp intelligence cut through the language barriers, his curiosity about the world beyond his village matching Maria's own scientific enthusiasm. During one particularly challenging afternoon, as Maria carefully measured out the last of the emergency water supplies, Carlitos approached her. "Miss Maria," he said, his voice soft but clear, "my grandmother says sometimes we must give to receive." The indigenous wisdom hidden in his simple statement struck Maria deeply. She understood then that survival was not just about scientific measurements, but about connection. A principle her father had never fully appreciated in his clinical approach to ecological research. When the next water delivery arrived, significantly less than promised, Maria made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She began rationing her own personal water supply, adding her washing water to the community's limited resources. The dust and heat became her companions, discomfort a small price to pay for the survival of these resilient people. A small bite on her neck seemed insignificant at the time, just another mark of her field work, another story to be brushed aside. The first signs of trouble emerged during her return journey to Sao Paulo. A persistent fever, strange sensations beneath her skin, a growing unease that medical clinics in the local town dismissed as tropical fatigue. Only her colleague Antonio Silva took her concerns seriously. "These symptoms are unusual," Antonio muttered, studying her medical records. "We need more tests." What they discovered was far beyond a simple infection. A rare tropical pathogen had taken root in Maria's body, creating a complex network of biological connections that defied medical understanding. The organism was adapting, growing, transforming in ways that medical science had never documented. Her father, initially skeptical, became her most ardent defender. Pablo Rodriguez, a renowned ecological researcher with a reputation for clinical precision, transformed from a distant academic to a passionate advocate. The medical team at Sao Paulo's top research hospital worked tirelessly, each discovery about the mysterious infection adding new layers to Maria's groundbreaking research. Carlitos, meanwhile, had been brought to Sao Paulo for specialized medical treatment. The boy who had survived years of environmental challenges now faced a different kind of battle. His resilience a testament to the community's Maria had dedicated her life to studying. As Maria lay in the hospital, the lines between scientific observation and personal experience blurred. The very organism that threatened her life was teaching humanity something profound about adaptation, about survival, about the invisible threads that connect all living systems. 3 months later, standing on the balcony of her father's research institute, Maria watched Carlitos playing in the garden. The boy who had been a stranger was now becoming family. Her father, once distant, now sat nearby, discussing ecological research with a warmth that had been absent for years. The scar on her neck, a reminder of her journey, caught the sunlight. It was more than a medical record. It was a story of sacrifice, of connection, of the profound ways in which human lives intersect with the complex systems of our world. Sometimes, Pablo said, watching Carlitos carefully examine a leaf, the most important discoveries happen not in laboratories, but in the spaces between human experiences. Maria smiled. Her ordeal had become more than a medical case study. It was a living testament to the power of empathy, of understanding, of the delicate balance that sustains life in its most challenging moments. The invisible threads the dense Amazon rainforest breathed around Maria Rodriguez, its humid air clinging to her skin like a second layer. Sweat traced delicate paths down her neck, mixing with the fine dust that seemed to permeate everything. Her research station, a modest collection of weathered tents and scientific equipment, stood as a fragile human outpost against the overwhelming green wilderness. At 35, Maria had dedicated her life to understanding the complex ecosystems of the Amazon, a passion that had driven her far from the comfortable laboratories of Sao Paulo. Her latest project focused on the intricate relationships between indigenous communities and their environmental systems, a study that her father, Pablo Rodriguez, had initially dismissed as romantic idealism. The water shortage in the small indigenous settlement of Terra Nova had become her primary concern. For weeks, she had documented the devastating impact of prolonged drought, watching how the delicate balance of community survival was being systematically dismantled by climate changes. Each day brought new challenges, children with parched lips, elders making impossible choices about water distribution, the land itself cracking under the relentless sun. Carlitos, an 8-year-old boy from the community, had become her unexpected ally. His bright eyes and sharp intelligence cut through the language barriers, his curiosity about the world beyond his village matching Maria's own scientific enthusiasm. During one particularly challenging afternoon, as Maria carefully measured out the last of the emergency water supplies, Carlitos approached her. "Miss Maria," he said, his voice soft but clear, My grandmother says sometimes we must give to receive. The indigenous wisdom hidden in his simple statement struck Maria deeply. She understood then that survival was not just about scientific measurements, but about connection. A principle her father had never fully appreciated in his clinical approach to ecological research. When the next water delivery arrived, significantly less than promised, Maria made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She began rationing her own personal water supply, adding her washing water to the community's limited resources. The dust and heat became her companions, discomfort a small price to pay for the survival of these resilient people. A small bite on her neck seemed insignificant at the time. Just another mark of her field work, another story to be brushed aside. The first signs of trouble emerged during her return journey to Sao Paulo. A persistent fever, strange sensations beneath her skin, a growing unease that medical clinics in the local town dismissed as tropical fatigue. Only her colleague Antonio Silva took her concerns seriously. "These symptoms are unusual," Antonio muttered, studying her medical records. "We need more tests." What they discovered was far beyond a simple infection. A rare tropical pathogen had taken root in Maria's body, creating a complex network of biological connections that defied medical understanding. The organism was adapting, growing, transforming in ways that medical science had never documented. Her father, initially skeptical, became her most ardent defender. Pablo Rodriguez, a renowned ecological researcher with a reputation for clinical precision, transformed from a distant academic to a passionate advocate. The medical team at Sao Paulo's top research hospital worked tirelessly, each discovery about the mysterious infection adding new layers to Maria's groundbreaking research. Carlitos, meanwhile, had been brought to Sao Paulo for specialized medical treatment. The boy who had survived years of environmental challenges now faced a different kind of battle. His resilience a testament to the communities Maria had dedicated her life to studying. As Maria lay in the hospital, the lines between scientific observation and personal experience blurred. The very organism that threatened her life was teaching humanity something profound about adaptation, about survival, about the invisible threads that connect all living systems. The weeks following Maria's recovery became a delicate dance of adaptation. The medical research team continued to study the mysterious pathogen that had invaded her body, each analysis revealing layers of biological complexity that challenged everything they understood about infectious diseases. "It's not just an infection, doctor," Antonio Silva explained during one of their late-night research sessions. "It's a form of biological communication we've never seen before. The organism doesn't just survive in the host, it negotiates." Maria's research took an unexpected turn. What had begun as a study of indigenous ecological systems had transformed into a groundbreaking investigation into interspecies biological dialogue. Her father, initially skeptical, now watched her work with a mixture of pride and scientific fascination. Carlitos became an integral part of their research and their lives. The young boy, who had survived both the harsh conditions of his indigenous community and a near-fatal illness, showed an uncanny ability to understand the subtle interconnections that Maria was documenting. "Look," he would say, pointing to intricate diagrams of cellular interactions. "It's like the forest. Everything talks to everything else." His insight was more than childlike observation. During one particularly intense research session, Carlitos noticed a pattern in the pathogen's cellular structure that had escaped the entire medical team's attention. Pablo Rodriguez, whose reputation as a rigorous ecological researcher was well established, found himself humbled by the boy's intuitive understanding. The adoption process became another complex negotiation. Indigenous rights, medical humanitarian considerations, and the unique circumstances of Carlitos' connection to Maria created a legal labyrinth that tested everyone's patience and commitment. Maria's scientific paper, documenting her unique infection and its implications for understanding biological adaptation, became a sensation in medical and ecological circles. International conferences requested her presentation. Research institutes sought her insights, and pharmaceutical companies began to explore the potential medical applications of her discovery. But beneath the professional success, a deeper transformation was taking place. Pablo Rodriguez, who had spent decades maintaining a clinical distance from both his research and his daughter, was learning to embrace a more holistic approach to understanding life. "Science is not just about observation," he told Maria one evening, watching Carlitos sketch complex ecosystem diagrams. "It's about connection, about understanding the conversations happening beneath the surface." The scar on Maria's neck, once a source of pain and fear, became a symbol of something greater, a reminder that survival is not about conquering nature, but about listening to its intricate languages. As the first anniversary of her return from the Amazon approached, Maria prepared for her next research expedition. Carlitos would accompany her, no longer just a subject of study, but a crucial part of her scientific and personal journey. The pathogen that had nearly claimed her life had become her greatest teacher. It had shown her that the boundaries between human, environment, and microscopic life were far more fluid than anyone had previously understood. "We are not separate," Maria would later write in her groundbreaking research paper. "We are a conversation, always negotiating, always adapting." And in the soft light of the Research Institute, with Carlitos sketching beside her and her father reviewing complex biological data, Maria understood that the most profound scientific discoveries often begin with the simplest of human experiences: compassion, curiosity, and the willingness to listen. The global resonance 5 years had passed since Maria's groundbreaking discovery, and the scientific world had been irreversibly transformed. What had begun as a mysterious tropical infection had evolved into a comprehensive understanding of biological communication that challenged the very foundations of ecological and medical research. The Rodriguez Research Institute, once a small regional facility, now stood as a beacon of innovative scientific exploration. International researchers, government officials, and environmental activists made pilgrimages to hear Maria speak about her revolutionary findings. Carlitos, now 13, had become an integral part of the research team. His unique perspective bridging indigenous knowledge with cutting-edge scientific methodology made him invaluable. Where traditional researchers saw barriers, he saw connections. Where others perceived complexity, He recognized patterns. "It's like the forest breathes," Carlitos would explain during collaborative sessions, his hands moving animatedly. Every organism is always talking, always sharing information. His insights had become crucial to their latest project, a comprehensive study of biological communication systems across different ecosystems. Maria and her father had developed a groundbreaking methodology that allowed them to map the intricate networks of communication between different life forms. The global implications were staggering. Pharmaceutical companies competed for research partnerships. Environmental conservation groups saw new possibilities for understanding ecosystem preservation. The pathogen that had once threatened Maria's life was now viewed as a key to unlocking mysteries of biological adaptation. But not everyone welcomed their discoveries. Dr. Elena Campos, a rival researcher from a competing institute, had been vocal in her criticism. "These are speculative theories," she argued during an international conference, "not rigorous scientific evidence." Maria knew the challenge. Her work existed at the intersection of traditional scientific methodology and a more holistic understanding of life systems. Each presentation, each research paper was a delicate negotiation between established scientific protocols and revolutionary insights. One crisp morning, as Maria prepared for a critical presentation at the World Ecological Congress, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Research Institute. A representative from the indigenous community, where Carlitos had originated, stood in their reception area. He carried an ornate wooden box, intricately carved with symbols that predated written language. "We have watched your work," the elder said, his eyes meeting Maria's with profound intensity. "What you are discovering, we have known for generations." The box contained ancient botanical records, medicinal knowledge passed down through centuries. It was a gift, but more importantly, it was a bridge. A recognition that scientific understanding was not about conquering knowledge, but about listening. Carlitos stepped forward, his connection to his indigenous roots evident in the way he received the gift. He began translating, not just words, but the deeper meanings embedded in the elder's traditional knowledge. Pablo Rodriguez watched from the sidelines, a subtle smile playing on his lips. The rigid scientist he had once been had transformed. He now understood that the most profound scientific discoveries emerged from humility, from recognizing that human knowledge was but a small fragment of a much larger conversation. As the elder prepared to leave, he turned to Maria. "Your work honors the connections," he said simply. "You are becoming a translator between worlds." The research that would follow would change everything, from how we understand disease transmission to how we approach environmental conservation. But for Maria, Carlitos, and Pablo, it was more than scientific achievement. It was a testament to the power of listening, to the invisible threads that connect all living systems, to the understanding that true knowledge comes not from conquest, but from conversation. Outside the Research Institute, the first summer rains began to fall, a gentle reminder of the Amazon, of the journey that had brought them to this moment, of the endless, intricate conversations happening just beneath the surface of everything we think we know. Echoes of transformation. The world was changing, and few understood why. Crop yields in regions devastated by climate change began to stabilize unexpectedly. Medical treatments for previously untreatable diseases emerged with startling precision. Environmental restoration projects showed miraculous recovery rates. And at the center of it all was the Rodriguez Research Institute, quietly revolutionizing humanity's understanding of biological interconnectedness. Carlitos, now 17, had become more than just a researcher. He was a bridge between worlds, indigenous wisdom, and cutting-edge scientific methodology. His ability to perceive biological communication patterns had evolved into something that defied traditional scientific explanation. During a critical global summit on ecological resilience, Carlitos demonstrated a breakthrough that left the international scientific community stunned. Using a complex array of biosensors and traditional indigenous tracking techniques, he mapped out communication networks between different ecosystem organisms that revealed unprecedented levels of interspecies collaboration. "It's not about competition," Carlitos explained, his voice calm and assured. "It's about constant negotiation. Every organism is always communicating, always adapting." Maria watched from the sidelines, a mixture of pride and concern etching her features. The mysterious pathogen that had once threatened her life had transformed into something far more profound, a key to understanding global ecological systems. But not everyone welcomed their discoveries. Corporate interests threatened by their research began to mobilize. Pharmaceutical companies saw their traditional models of medical intervention crumbling. Agricultural giants found their established practices challenged by a radically different understanding of ecological interactions. Dr. Elena Campos, now a reluctant collaborator, approached Maria during a break in the conference. "What you're suggesting," she said, her voice a mix of professional respect and lingering skepticism, "it's nothing short of a complete reimagining of biological science." Maria smiled. "Science has always been about reimagining," she replied. "The real challenge came unexpectedly. A series of global ecological anomalies began to emerge, strange patterns of plant growth, unusual animal migration routes, inexplicable environmental shifts that seemed to follow the communication patterns they had discovered." Pablo Rodriguez, now semi-retired but still deeply involved in research, began to piece together a more complex puzzle. The biological communication networks they had identified were not just passive systems. They were active, responsive, almost intelligent. "We're not just observing," he told Maria during a late-night research session. "We're participating in a conversation far more complex than we ever imagined." Their research had attracted global attention. Governments sought their insights. Environmental organizations viewed their work as a potential key to addressing climate change. Indigenous communities from around the world began to reach out, sharing ancient knowledge that aligned with their scientific discoveries. Carlitos received an invitation to speak at the United Nations, an unprecedented honor for someone so young. But his preparation was interrupted by a discovery that would change everything. Deep in the Research Institute's advanced laboratory, a breakthrough emerged. The original pathogen that had infected Maria years ago was not just a biological entity. It was a communication system, a living network of information exchange that could potentially bridge different biological systems. It's like a universal translator, Carlitos explained, his fingers dancing across holographic displays, showing complex biological interactions. Not just for communication, but for understanding. The implications were staggering. Medical treatments could be revolutionized. Environmental restoration could be approached with unprecedented precision. The very concept of individual organisms began to dissolve, replaced by a more holistic understanding of life as a collaborative, communicative system. But with great discovery came great risk. Powerful interests began to circle. Corporate entities saw both threat and opportunity. Government agencies recognized the potential for both healing and manipulation. As the sun set over the Rodriguez Research Institute, Maria, Carlitos, and Pablo stood together. A family forged by an unexpected journey, now at the forefront of a scientific revolution that could reshape humanity's understanding of life itself. "We are not just researchers," Maria said, looking out over the landscape that had changed so much. "We are translators, listening to a conversation that has been happening long before we arrived and will continue long after we're gone." The conversation of life continued. Listening, adapting, transforming. The threshold of transformation, the global quantum communication network they had discovered, was evolving faster than anyone could have predicted. Within months of their initial demonstration, the world began to change in ways both subtle and profound. Agricultural systems transformed, medical treatments became impossibly precise, and human understanding of ecological interactions underwent a radical shift. Carlitos, now recognized as one of the most influential scientists of his generation, found himself at the center of a transformation that was simultaneously scientific, philosophical, and deeply spiritual. Their research had revealed something far more complex than a simple communication network. It was a form of collective consciousness that existed between all living systems, a web of information and energy that connected every organism on the planet. "We are not observers," Carlitos would explain in his groundbreaking lectures. "We are participants in a living system of infinite complexity." The indigenous communities that had first inspired their research became crucial partners in understanding this new reality. Traditional knowledge systems that had been marginalized for centuries were now at the forefront of scientific innovation. Maria watched her life's work unfold with a mixture of wonder and concern. The discovery was beautiful, but its potential for misuse was equally significant. Powerful corporations and government agencies began to see the quantum communication network as a potential tool for control and manipulation. A secret meeting was called. Representatives from indigenous communities, independent scientists, environmental activists, and progressive global leaders gathered at the Rodriguez Research Institute. Their mission was to protect the integrity of the discovery, to ensure it would not become another weapon of exploitation. Carlitos presented their most recent findings. The quantum communication network was not just a passive system. It was adaptive, intelligent, and appeared to have its own form of agency. "It's listening," he said, "and it's learning." The implications were staggering. this was not just a scientific discovery, but a fundamental reimagining of life itself. The boundaries between individual organisms, between species, between living and non-living systems were dissolving. But with great discovery came great complexity. The first signs of resistance emerged. Conservative scientific institutions, threatened by a paradigm that challenged everything they understood, began to push back. Corporations saw both incredible opportunity and existential threat in this new understanding. Maria and Carlitos knew that their work was about more than scientific discovery. It was about creating a new way of understanding our place in the world, a perspective that recognized the deep interconnectedness of all living systems. Their quantum communication interface continued to evolve. What had begun as a research tool was becoming something more, a bridge between human consciousness and the vast, complex network of life that surrounded them. "We are not separate," Carlitos would say. "We are a conversation, always negotiating, always adapting." The world stood on the threshold of a transformation that would redefine everything humans thought they knew about life, consciousness, and their place in the universe. The infinite conversation in the final days of her life. Maria Rodriguez understood that some discoveries are too profound to be contained by a single lifetime. The quantum communication network they had uncovered had transformed human civilization in ways no one could have predicted. Ecological systems were healing. Medical treatments had become miraculous. The very concept of individual existence had been reimagined. Carlitos, now a global leader in quantum ecological research, sat beside her bed. His connection to her transcended the traditional bonds of family. They were partners, pioneers, explorers of a new understanding of life itself. "We were just listeners," Maria whispered, her voice soft but filled with a lifetime of wisdom. "Just translators of a conversation that has always existed." Outside the window of the Research Institute, the world pulsed with a new kind of life. The boundaries between human, animal, plant, and environment had become beautifully blurred. Their work had shown that life was not a collection of separate entities, but a complex, interconnected dialogue. Pablo Rodriguez, now in his 90s, sat quietly in the corner. His transformation from a rigid scientific researcher to a visionary who embraced the most radical understanding of life was complete. He had become a bridge between old scientific paradigms and a new way of perceiving existence. Carlitos held Maria's hand, feeling the quantum communication network that now connected all living things. Her life force was not ending. It was transforming, becoming part of a larger conversation. "Remember the Amazon," Maria said, her eyes distant. "It all began there, with a simple act of giving, of listening." Their journey had started with a water shortage in a small indigenous community, a moment of sacrifice that had revealed the most profound scientific discovery in human history. The mysterious pathogen that had once threatened Maria's life had become the key to understanding a universal language of life. Global leaders, indigenous elders, scientists from every discipline gathered around her, not to mourn, but to witness a transition. As Maria's physical form began to fade, something extraordinary happened. The quantum communication network they had discovered became visible, not through technology, but through a collective understanding. Threads of energy, of information, of consciousness, connected everything in the room, in the world beyond. "We are the conversation," Carlitos whispered, tears streaming down his face. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of profound understanding. Maria smiled. Her final breath was not an ending, but a transformation. Outside, the first rains of the season began to fall. In the Amazon, in the Research Institute, in every ecosystem on the planet, life continued its endless dialogue. Listening, adapting, transforming, the conversation would continue. Silent delivery. I never imagined that signing up for a food delivery app would lead me into such a bizarre night. Fresh out of college and looking for some extra cash, I had just started working for Quick Serve, hoping it would be an easy way to make money between classes. My first few weeks were uneventful. I'd cruise around the city, picking up orders and dropping them off without incident. But that particular holiday weekend changed everything. It was well past midnight when I accepted what seemed like a routine delivery from a 24/7 fast food joint. The order was simple, destined for an industrial area on the outskirts of town. The navigation system guided me through dimly lit streets, eventually leading me to a massive, seemingly abandoned warehouse complex. The parking lot stretched out like a concrete desert, with only a few scattered semi-trucks breaking the monotony. The warehouse itself was a massive rectangular structure, its windows like dark, empty eyes staring into the night. Something about the place immediately set my nerves on edge. I double-checked the delivery instructions. Side entrance, front desk drop-off. The side door was a heavy metal beast with a small glass window. Peering through, I could barely make out the dim interior, the reflection of my headlights making it difficult to see anything clearly. Pushing the door open, I was immediately struck by the oppressive darkness. A tiny safety light in the corner provided just enough illumination to reveal a small entrance room. The silence was absolute. No machinery humming, no distant conversations, nothing. As I stepped forward, the corridor ahead disappeared into complete darkness. The more I looked, the more uncomfortable I became. Something felt fundamentally wrong. I pulled out my phone, checking the delivery details for the third time, hoping I'd misread something. That's when I heard it, a phone ringing, echoing from deep within the hallway. First distant, then closer. The sound seemed to be moving towards me. "I have a delivery," I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness. I placed the bag on the ground, my instincts screaming at me to leave. A large figure began emerging from the darkness. No response, no acknowledgement. Just slow, deliberate movement. The way the person approached felt predatory, unnatural. Every muscle in my body tensed. Without another thought, I turned and walked, then ran back to my car. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of movement behind the small glass window. Days later, a call from the local police turned my strange experience into something even more unsettling. They wanted to know why I'd been at an abandoned warehouse at 2:30 in the morning. Apparently, when the warehouse workers returned after the holiday, they found the delivery bag mysteriously placed in the middle of the hallway. The investigating officer revealed something chilling. Someone had used a fake account to place the order. The bag wasn't even touched. It was as if the entire delivery was just a setup. To this day, I wonder what might have happened if I had stayed, if I had waited for that figure to approach me. Some deliveries are better left undelivered. Midnight shadows, the rain pelted against the windows of our tiny pizza shop, creating a rhythmic backdrop to an otherwise dead quiet evening. Jake and I had been working the night shift at Rocky's Pizza, a small takeout joint tucked away in the heart of our sleepy rural town. Most nights were slow, with just enough orders to keep us from falling asleep on our feet. Around 10 o'clock, Jake suggested we start cleaning up and maybe clock out early. I was wiping down the tables when the front desk phone suddenly rang. Its shrill sound cut through the silence, making me jump. I picked up the receiver. "Rocky's Pizza," I muttered, waiting. Silence, just a faint, almost imperceptible breathing on the other end. After several seconds, I was about to hang up when I noticed something odd outside. A car parked in the back of the lot, its interior light casting a soft glow. Jake answered the next call. A hushed conversation. Then he hung up just as the car's light went out and it drove away. "Just an old guy ordering delivery," he said casually. But something didn't feel right. 10 minutes later, Jake prepared a pizza and handed it to me for delivery. The address was 11 minutes away, deep in a neighborhood of sprawling, expensive homes. As I drove, the rain intensified, turning the world into a blur of gray and darkness. Google Maps guided me down a long, winding driveway that ended in a cul-de-sac with 3 separate driveways. I pulled up to the designated house, a massive, outdated mansion that seemed to loom out of the darkness. All the lights were off. I tried calling the customer. Straight to voicemail. Frustration mixed with a growing sense of unease. I tossed the pizza onto the passenger seat and started to back out. Suddenly, a loud bang erupted from the front of the pizza shop. Jake and I exchanged a look of pure confusion. We rushed to the front and found a crack in the door. A heavy rock lay on the ground outside. The parking lot was empty, silent save for the rain's constant drumming. We decided to ignore it, finishing our cleanup and leaving through the back door. On my drive home, my mind kept replaying the strange events of the night. Pulling into my driveway, I noticed a car parked on the street. Something about it seemed familiar. As I walked inside, I heard tires splashing through puddles. My heart began to race. I peeked out the window. It was the same car from the pizza shop, now sitting directly in front of my house. The engine was running, but I couldn't see inside. Minutes passed. Then a car door opened. Panic rising, I called Jake. "I think someone from earlier is outside my house," I whispered. "Call the cops." Now he urged. I dialed 911, my hands shaking. The dispatcher assured me officers were on their way. Through the window, I saw a figure in dark clothing walking up my driveway, hood pulled low. Footsteps approached the front door, then moved along the side of the house. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of rain. Then a sudden movement. The figure stopped right outside my window. Heart pounding, I slowly moved the curtain. Our eyes met. Cold, calculating eyes staring directly at me. A knock, loud, aggressive, then silence. When the police arrived minutes later, there was no trace of the car or the mysterious figure. Just an empty street, wet from the rain, and a story that would haunt me for years to come. Some deliveries are never just about the food. The farmhouse trap. I was 16, fresh-faced, and eager to prove myself. My parents had recently started offering delivery services at their small family restaurant, and I'd volunteered to be their driver. With a brand new driver's license and my mom's SUV, I felt invincible. That Thursday evening started like any other. The order seemed routine, a delivery to an address way out on the edge of town. 25 minutes away, Google Maps warned, far beyond the familiar streets I knew. As I drove, the landscape transformed. Suburban neighborhoods gave way to endless farmland, with isolated farmhouses dotting the distant horizon. The roads became narrower, more isolated. My confidence began to waver. The final turn was onto an unpaved path, barely wide enough for my SUV. Dust kicked up behind me, obscuring the rearview mirror. The path ended abruptly in a small grass field, with an old farmhouse looming ahead. Something felt wrong. Eerie silence surrounded me. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own heartbeat and the crunch of grass under my feet as I approached the house. The porch light was on, but every other window remained dark and lifeless. Just before reaching the porch, a sound broke the silence. A loud wooden noise from the backyard, something like a door opening. My instincts screamed to run, but teenage bravado kept me moving forward. I dropped the bag, rang the doorbell, and started backing away. That's when I heard them, footsteps, multiple sets, running. I turned and saw 3 men sprinting across the grass. Before I could react, I was tackled to the ground. Hands grabbed me, emptied my pockets. I screamed, knowing no one could hear me in this isolated place. They worked with terrifying efficiency. One holding me down, another rifling through my clothes, the third watching. A kick to my stomach. Then they were gone, driving away into the darkness. I was left alone. No phone, no way to call for help. I started walking, shock and fear mixing with the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. 30 to 40 minutes passed before a patrol car found me. My parents had reported me missing. Later, the police discovered a small barn behind the farmhouse. Another delivery bag was found inside, evidence these men had attempted this before. The stolen car was eventually located nearly 400 miles away, completely stripped. The attackers were never identified. That night changed everything. The world wasn't the safe place I'd imagined. Some deliveries are more than just a simple job. They're a test of survival. Years later, I still remember the sound of those footsteps. The moment everything changed. Midnight highway encounter. The rain came down in sheets, turning the highway into a treacherous ribbon of darkness. I was driving my delivery van well past midnight, the kind of late-night run that happens when businesses need urgent shipments. The long, empty stretches of road were my only companion. Headlights appeared ahead, an old pickup truck crawling at an impossibly slow pace. Even on a wet night, the driver seemed paralyzed with fear, moving so cautiously it bordered on dangerous. Patience wearing thin, I prepared to pass. Just as I signaled to change lanes, the truck suddenly veered off the road. It lurched down a steep slope, miraculously avoiding the trees that stood like silent sentinels in the darkness. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. Something didn't feel right. Despite knowing it wasn't my responsibility, I couldn't leave someone potentially injured. No cell signal meant I'd have to check personally. The rain soaked through my clothes as I carefully made my way down the slope. The truck was wedged among some bushes, seemingly undamaged. As I approached the driver's side, the window was completely fogged over. I knocked, then opened the door. A man sat inside, frantically trying to start the engine. His eyes met mine, a look of desperation mixed with something else. Something I couldn't quite read. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Need some help?" Silence hung between us for a moment too long. Then his response came. "Can you give me a ride?" I agreed to take him to the nearest gas station. As we drove, an uncomfortable tension filled the van. He watched me constantly, his gaze never wavering. No small talk, no gratitude, just an intense, unblinking stare. The lights of a small town appeared in the distance. Relief washed over me, thinking our strange journey was almost over. But relief was the last thing I should have felt. As we pulled into the gas station, something shifted. The man's behavior became more erratic. He began looking around nervously, scanning the windows, the surroundings. Before I could process what was happening, he lunged. Suddenly, I was being attacked, punched, forced against the door. Survival instinct kicked in as I tried to escape. Then, as quickly as it began, the attack stopped. Police cars surrounded us. Officers pulled the man away, explaining later that he was wanted for a serious crime. They had been tracking him, waiting for an opportunity. The stolen truck, the seemingly random encounter, it had all been part of something much larger. I was just an unwitting participant in a dangerous game. As the adrenaline subsided, I realized how close I'd come to something truly terrible. Some deliveries are more than just a job. Sometimes they're a test of survival. The rain continued to fall outside, washing away the evidence of our encounter. The unexpected delivery. I never planned on becoming a food delivery driver. It was just a stopgap after losing my part-time retail job, a way to keep some cash flowing while I figured out my next move. The ads made it look so easy, flexible hours, quick money. Reality, as always, was far more complicated. The gig was a roller coaster of stress and frustration. Driving around town, racing against the clock, all for a few measly dollars. Some days, I'd spend more on gas than I'd earn. But I was young, my only bills were my car payments, so I kept pushing. That night started like any other. A simple order from a local Chinese restaurant, nothing special, just another quick run through the less affluent part of town. As I drove, my phone buzzed with messages from the customer. "Hurry up. Where are you?" The tone felt off, almost aggressive. I pulled up to a small, worn-down house in a quiet neighborhood. Something immediately felt wrong. Every single light was off, creating an eerie silence that sent a chill down my spine. As I approached the front door, a man suddenly appeared from around the corner of the house. His sudden presence made me jump. "Hey," he called out, walking toward me with a key in hand. "You're late," he said, his voice tight with barely contained anger. But something didn't add up. The way he moved, the intensity of his gaze, it all felt calculated. When he tried to usher me inside, My instincts screamed danger. "I'm okay," I stammered, backing away. "I should get back to work." His demeanor changed instantly. He reached out, trying to grab me. I jerked back, my heart racing. Suddenly, bright headlights flooded the driveway. The man by the door looked panicked, rushing outside as a car pulled up. It turned out to be the actual homeowners returning from dinner. They had no idea who the man was or how he'd gotten a key to their house. We called the police, but the pieces never fully came together. Why was he there? What was he planning? The questions haunted me long after that night. One thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was about survival. I quit delivering food the very next day. Some jobs aren't worth the risk. Some deliveries carry a price far beyond what's written on the receipt. Years later, I still think about that night, about the man with the key, about what might have happened if those headlights hadn't appeared when they did. Some stories don't have clean endings. Some mysteries remain unsolved, lurking in the shadows of memory. The grocery store trap. Delivery driving was never my main gig. It was a relaxed side hustle, something to earn extra cash for vacations and shopping. No pressure, no stress, just an easy way to pad my income between my regular shifts. That night started promising. By 10 o'clock, I'd already made more money than usual. Most drivers would have called it quits, but I was riding a wave of productivity. One more order, I thought, just one more. The order seemed simple enough, a medium-sized meal from Wendy's. But something felt off from the start. Instead of a home address, the GPS pinpointed a location near a closed grocery store. 15 minutes away, completely isolated. As I pulled into the empty parking lot, the silence was suffocating. Streetlights cast long shadows across the abandoned concrete landscape. I texted the customer, hoping for some clarity. "We're around back," came the quick reply. "Come right around." Skepticism crept in. I drove slowly around the store, scanning the area. A few cars sat in the far corner, but no people, no movement, just darkness and a growing sense of unease. My phone buzzed again. "We're coming up right now." Then I saw them. A figure suddenly ran in front of my car, hands raised in a stopping motion. As he approached my window, something felt fundamentally wrong. Before I could process what was happening, the back door of my car swung open. Instinct took over. I dropped the food bag and floored the gas pedal. The guy by my window shouted, but I was already moving. In the rearview mirror, I saw someone trying to shift the car into park, desperately reaching forward. When that failed, they jumped out of the moving vehicle. I didn't stop until I was miles away, heart racing, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The police were frustratingly noncommittal. "We'll look into it," they said, but I knew better. Later, I discovered something chilling. 2 weeks before my incident, another delivery driver had gone missing in a nearby town. Their car was never found. Some deliveries are about more than just food. Some are about survival. The roads became a little less inviting after that night. Every delivery, every unknown address became a potential threat. I learned that night that sometimes the most dangerous part of the job isn't the driving. It's the moments between the drops, when anything can happen. The midnight call. Saturday nights at Pizza Palace were always unpredictable. Me and my college buddies worked the evening shifts, turning what could have been a mundane job into something almost fun. The rhythm was always the same: busy until 7 or 8, then a sudden drop in orders. That night felt different from the start. Around 10:15, most of us were cleaning up, expecting to close soon. The phone rang, breaking the quiet of the almost empty shop. I picked up, hearing something that made my skin crawl. A woman's voice, soft, trembling. She spoke so quietly I could barely make out her words. A small pepperoni pizza, she requested. Something in her tone set off alarm bells. "Are you okay?" I found myself asking before hanging up. 15 minutes later, I was driving to the address. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. As I approached, a strange light caught my attention, flickering from around the garage, casting shifting shadows. The front door stood wide open, light spilling out into the darkness. Before I could even reach the porch, I heard heavy footsteps rushing downstairs inside. A large, bald man appeared in the doorway, sweating, out of breath. His face a mask of anger and something else, fear, perhaps. He looked like someone desperate to hide something. "Is this the right order?" I asked, sensing something was terribly wrong. The man mumbled about finding his wallet, disappearing down the hallway. Then I heard it, a soft thump from upstairs, like something or someone being hit against a wall. When he returned, he grabbed the pizza with an urgency that spoke volumes. Cash thrown at me, door slammed shut. Something wasn't right. I called the police, reporting the strange situation. A wellness check was promised. Later that night, an officer called back with bizarre news. No woman lived at the address. The man claimed to be living alone, but I knew what I'd heard. I knew what I'd sensed. Some deliveries reveal more than just an address. Some uncover secrets that were never meant to be discovered. Years later, that night still haunts me. The trembling voice, the flickering light, the unexplained sounds. Some mysteries are better left undelivered. Crossroads of danger. 4 years on the road, and I thought I'd seen it all. Driving cross-country for a moving company, transporting people's entire lives from one coast to another. 30-hour drives became my normal, the endless roads my only constant companion. The Midwest was a special kind of hell. Iowa and Nebraska, just endless fields of grass, stretching into infinity. Monotony was the real enemy on these drives, more dangerous than any external threat. That night the sun had just dipped below the horizon as I crossed into Nebraska. 20 hours of driving already behind me, my eyes heavy, my mind wandering. The first sign something was wrong came subtly. A car parked on the roadside, headlights burning bright. As I approached, I noticed the exhaust steaming, still running. A man leaned against the driver's door, watching me pass. Our eyes met, a nod exchanged, but something felt off. He wasn't broken down, he was waiting. Checking my mirrors, I watched the car disappear behind me. Minutes later, another surprise. A car sideways across the road. Another vehicle parked nearby, a large box fan lying conspicuously beside it. My trucker instincts screamed danger. I saw them then, multiple men, positioned with a terrifying precision. No room to turn, no escape route. A car approached from behind, blocking my retreat. Men sprinting towards me from all directions. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This was a planned ambush. Adrenaline took over. I slammed the gas, hearing a pop at the back of my trailer. The doors swung open, cargo spilling onto the highway. The men in front tried to block my path, but I wasn't stopping for anyone. I rammed the blocking car, sending it spinning off the road. Gunshots rang out, missing me by inches. When the police arrived, the story unfolded. These weren't random criminals. They had specific information about the valuable shipment I was carrying, tracked the route, planned every detail. The captured attacker revealed the full plot. They were targeting the wealthy homeowner's possessions. But we both knew what remained unspoken. Witnesses are inconvenient. Some deliveries are about more than just cargo. Some are about survival. The road stretched endlessly before me, carrying the weight of what could have been. The midnight order. Just past 10 o'clock on a quiet night, he walked into Blazing Slice Pizzeria. I was organizing boxes in the back, but something about his entrance caught my attention immediately. Early 30s, but looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were unfocused, movements jerky and uncertain. My coworker handled the order while I watched, sensing something was off. The man seemed timid, almost afraid. A simple medium pizza order, but with an unusual request for delivery. He handed over a slip of paper with an address, as if he couldn't trust himself to remember where he lived. Strange, I thought. Who comes into a shop to order a delivery to their own home? 10 minutes later, I was on the road with the pizza. Almost immediately, I noticed a car behind me. Erratic driving, speeding up, slowing down, occasional swerving. My mind connected the dots to the strange customer from the shop. The neighborhood looked ordinary enough. I pulled into the driveway, stepped up to the porch, and knocked. A different man answered, wide-eyed, similarly disheveled. When I mentioned the delivery for Matthew, he seemed barely present, quiet, distant. As I turned to leave, movement caught my eye. A figure in a hooded jacket jogging down the sidewalk, staring directly at us. Things escalated quickly. The hooded man blocked my car. Another man started running toward me. In a moment of pure survival instinct, I threw the car in reverse, narrowly avoiding them. Chased by their shouts, I sped away, heart racing. The police arrived within the hour. Both men were arrested, caught in a poorly planned robbery attempt. Apparently, they'd pulled similar stunts before, with one previous incident resulting in a violent assault. Their plan was laughably bad, ordering a pizza to their own address, thinking somehow this would make them less suspicious. Drunk and desperate, they'd created a trap that spectacularly failed. But for me, it was more than just a failed robbery. It was a moment that could have turned deadly in an instant. Some deliveries are about more than just food. Some are about survival. Years later, I still remember the look in their eyes, the desperation, the potential for violence that hung in the air like a thick fog. A reminder that behind every door, behind every order, a story waits to be told. The last delivery. Working for my best friend's parents' restaurant seemed like a good idea at first. A chance to spend more time together, earn some cash, maybe have some fun. Reality was far different. The job was a nightmare of micromanagement and constant criticism. My friend and I were rarely scheduled together, turning what should have been a fun gig into a soul-crushing experience. By my third month, I was ready to quit. That night started like any other. Slow at first, then a sudden order came in around 8:30. My friend's father handed me a delivery bag with a look that said this was more than just a routine drop-off. The address was 40 minutes away, an eternity for our small town. With only 15 minutes left in my shift, I protested. But he didn't care. Another opportunity to remind me who was in charge. As I drove, the landscape changed. Civilization fell away, replaced by isolation. The last 5 minutes of the drive revealed a street with 6 old, decrepit houses. No lights, no life, just darkness and silence. I parked and approached the house, an uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. The porch light was on, but something felt fundamentally wrong. I rang the doorbell, knocked, nothing. A flicker of movement caught my eye through a window. A light shifting inside. Then a young man appeared, holding a flashlight and a grocery bag. His request was bizarre. Could I bring the food inside? Something in his eyes suggested this was no ordinary delivery. I caught a glimpse of the interior, dust-covered, empty. The flashlight instead of house lights screamed danger. Instinct took over. I dropped the bag and ran. Behind me, the man stepped onto the porch, watching intently. When I told my friend's father, his only concern was that I hadn't collected payment. That was the final straw. I quit on the spot. Later, I realized how close I'd come to something potentially terrible. A vacant house, a strange man, an isolated location. Some deliveries are about more than just food. Some are about survival. Years later, the memory still sends a chill down my spine. A reminder that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, disguised as something as simple as a food delivery. The road can be a dangerous place, especially when you least expect it. Midnight pursuit. Driving a delivery van wasn't just a job, it was my lifeline. Delivering products to family-owned stores around the city, I developed a rhythm, a routine, something that made the late-night runs feel almost normal. That night started like any other. 11 o'clock, the last delivery complete. 30 minutes between me and the warehouse, the promise of rest calling my name. The first sign something was wrong came subtly. A car pulled up behind me at an intersection. No big deal, I thought, but as minutes passed, the vehicle remained glued to my bumper. Most drivers would have passed. The lane was clear, but not this one. The headlights grew brighter, closer. So close I could barely see anything in my mirrors. My van felt like a target, trapped between the darkness and this relentless pursuer. At a stop sign, it happened. A deliberate bump, not hard enough to cause serious damage, but enough to shake the entire van. Enough to make my heart race. Before I could fully process what was happening, a man was at my window, smiling, motioning for me to roll down the glass. 3 men, the driver and 2 others, all moving with a predatory precision that made my blood run cold. What started as a routine check for insurance quickly transformed. Their silence was more terrifying than any words, just stares, calculating, waiting. I tried to run, they were faster. One grabbed me, shoving me against the van. Threats whispered, harsh breathing, the sound of them gathering items from my vehicle. Then came the real horror, an attempt to force me into their car. I truly knew, that getting into that vehicle meant something far worse than robbery. I fought with everything I had. 20 seconds of pure survival instinct. They gave up, tossed me aside, drove away into the night. When the police arrived, the men had vanished. No identification, no leads, just another mysterious late-night incident. I never discovered their true intentions, but some part of me knew exactly what would have happened if I'd stopped fighting. Some deliveries are about more than packages. Some are about survival. The road has its own stories, its own darkness, and sometimes you're just lucky enough to make it home. Story 16. The Riverside House. I'm 27 now, and it's been years since I last spent the night at the Richardson family's house. They lived in a beautiful Victorian home right alongside the river. But every time I stayed overnight there, something felt deeply wrong. One particular incident stands out in my memory with crystal clarity. It was Super Bowl Sunday, with the Eagles facing the Chiefs. The Richardsons were hosting their annual party, and after the game, about 10 of us kids ended up staying over. We mostly watched the Puppy Bowl since we were kids, though Tommy, who idolized Mahomes, insisted we watch some of the actual game. As the night progressed and the parents dozed off upstairs, we tried our best to stay awake as long as possible. It must have been around 3 in the morning when all of us kids were startled by a loud crash. The distinct sound of shattering glass coming from the bathroom. From our position in the living room, we had a clear view of the bathroom door. All the adults were asleep upstairs with their own bathroom. There was no logical reason for anyone to use this one. We sat there watching the bathroom door for over an hour, but nobody ever emerged. In the morning, we naturally woke up early, being kids, and immediately went to wake the adults to tell them what happened. They dismissed our story, assuming we had caused the noise ourselves. But here's what made it truly inexplicable. The bathroom had a specific layout: sink immediately to your right when you entered, with an ornate Victorian mirror above it, and above that, a shelf with a decorative brass lip designed to prevent items from falling. When we investigated that morning, we found something bizarre. A large crystal perfume bottle, about 12 inches tall, had seemingly been thrown from the shelf above the mirror. It landed exactly 20 feet across the bathroom, against the clawfoot tub. The strange part, all the broken crystal was pushed up against the side of the tub. None of it was below the shelf where the bottle had originally sat. It was as if someone had thrown it with tremendous force directly at the tub. There was a small window in the bathroom, but it was a narrow stained glass panel that couldn't even be opened. This wasn't the last strange occurrence. A year later, the Richardsons went to Europe for a month, and I was asked to feed their Persian cats. The first time I entered their empty house alone, something felt different. I'd been there countless times before, always entering through the kitchen door, crossing their garden path to the conservatory, and accessing the house that way. Never once had I felt uneasy until that day. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt heavy, oppressive. Every nerve in my body screamed that I shouldn't be there. I knew I had to feed their cats, so I forced myself to get the food and water. But the feeling of hostility was overwhelming. Later, I learned that, during the house's early days, a previous owner had taken his life in that same bathroom where we'd heard the glass breaking. The house itself was beautiful, all original woodwork, stained glass, and river views. But something darker lurked beneath its Victorian charm. Perhaps whatever lingered there simply didn't like visitors. Or maybe it was trying to tell us something about its tragic history. Either way, that house taught me that sometimes places hold onto their past in ways we can't fully understand. And sometimes they find ways to make their stories known, whether we want to hear them or not. Story 17. The rainforest clock when I was 8. My sister Emma and I shared a room on the first floor of our craftsman bungalow. Our bedroom door opened directly into the kitchen. Emma had this fascinating alarm clock, a vibrant rainforest scene with a toucan perched on a branch, holding the clock face in its beak. Every morning, I'd look at that clock first thing, calculating how much more precious sleep time remained. One morning, around 7:20, I drowsily rolled over to check the time. Through my sleepy haze, I saw the time, but then something dark moved in front of the clock. At first, I assumed it was my father, just a tall, dark figure with no distinguishable features, like a shadow given form. In my half-awake state, I didn't think much of it, assuming my tired eyes were playing tricks. I started rubbing my eyes and felt the mattress sink at the foot of my bed, as if someone had sat down. Naturally, I murmured, "What's up, Dad?" but no answer came. Suddenly more alert, I sat up quickly, but no one was there. Glancing back at the toucan clock, less than a minute had passed since I first looked at it. Heart racing, I bolted into the kitchen, expecting to find my father. The only person there was my mother at the counter, startled by my sudden appearance. Before she could ask what was wrong, I blurted out, "Mom, where's Dad?" Looking puzzled, she replied, "He left around 6:30, probably halfway to Portland by now." Why, obviously, I couldn't tell her the truth. She'd think I was imagining things. So I just mumbled, "Never mind, thanks, Mom." Going back to bed. For many years, I pushed this incident to the back of my mind. Then one day, my older sister asked me if I'd ever seen a dark figure moving through the house. My blood ran cold as I realized my young eyes hadn't been playing tricks that morning after all. Years later, I finally told my father, who remains firmly skeptical. He dismissed my story, suggesting it just meant someone had broken into the house. But that was impossible. My mother would have known if anyone had entered, and our security system was always armed at night. Looking back, what fascinates me most is my immediate assumption that the figure was my father. Perhaps it wasn't there to frighten or harm me at all. Maybe it was some kind of protective presence passing through, which is why my child's mind instantly associated it with the safety and security I felt around my dad. The innocence of my reaction is particularly intriguing. Instead of being terrified by a shadow figure in my room, my sleepy brain simply categorized it as something familiar and safe. It wasn't until later, when I was fully awake and realized it couldn't have been my father, that the true strangeness of the encounter hit me. Now, decades later, I believe what I experienced that morning wasn't just a trick of light or a child's imagination. The fact that my sister independently saw similar figures in our house suggests something supernatural was indeed present. But unlike many ghost stories that focus on malevolent entities, this presence felt benign, even protective, so much so that my first instinct was to mistake it for my father. Sometimes I wonder if these entities are always as frightening as we make them out to be, or if our adult minds have simply forgotten how to accept their presence with the simple, trusting nature of a child. Perhaps that morning, half asleep and unclouded by adult skepticism, I saw the truth more clearly than I ever could now. Maybe some shadows aren't meant to frighten us. They're there to watch over us, silent guardians in the early morning light. Story 18, Echoes of Warning Eye, have several stories about the unexplainable. But these two still make me question everything I thought I knew about reality. The first happened to my friend Matthew when he was a young man. One quiet afternoon, he was sitting in his room playing video games when everything changed. He began hearing things from the corner of his room, and there was this peculiar scent that reminded him of burning leaves. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was just his imagination. These occurrences continued for weeks, strange flickering in his peripheral vision, like small flames dancing in corners of rooms. Eventually, he told his parents, who contacted a local spiritual advisor to perform a blessing ritual in the house. The phenomena stopped after that, and we all forgot about it. Then years later, tragedy struck. Matthew's mother was in a terrible accident involving fire in their kitchen. His older sister tried to save her and suffered severe burns on her hands in the process. No one could explain how the fire started. There were no electrical issues, no gas leaks, nothing that could have sparked it. After 3 agonizing days in the hospital, his mother passed away. One night, several months after the funeral, a group of us were walking home late, sharing ghost stories and trying to lighten the mood. Matthew had been quiet all evening, just listening. Suddenly, he broke his silence. "Remember when I used to see those fires in my house?" he said softly. "Remember how my mom died?" The weight of that connection hit us like a physical blow. Those visions hadn't been his imagination. They had been warnings. The second story involves another friend, Oliver. His family struggled with poverty, and his father battled serious health issues. They lived in an old apartment building where one of their neighbors was an elderly man who rarely left his home. One morning at 5 a.m., while Oliver's father was in the hospital with pneumonia, this elderly neighbor knocked on their door. Oliver opened it, still groggy from sleep. The old man looked at him with strange intensity and said, "Why aren't you dressed yet? Go visit your father for the last time." That was the day Oliver's father passed away. Both stories haunt me because I know these men personally. They're not the type to fabricate stories, especially about losing their parents. What strikes me most is the prophetic nature of these experiences. In Matthew's case, those visions of fire seemed to foreshadow his mother's tragic death years later. With Oliver, that mysterious neighbor somehow knew about his father's impending death. This makes me question everything we think we know about time and reality. Were those glimpses of fire really warnings? Did that elderly neighbor have some connection to the other side? Could these tragedies have been prevented if we'd understood the signs sooner? But perhaps that's not how these warnings work. Maybe they're not meant to change what's coming, but rather to prepare us for it. Matthew's visions and the neighbor's warning suggest that sometimes the universe tries to prepare us for life's hardest moments. even if we don't understand the messages until later. The most unsettling part is knowing that these signs are out there, speaking to us in ways we might not comprehend, like echoes from the future reaching back to touch the present. They remind us that reality is far more complex and interconnected than we imagine. Sometimes the truth finds ways to reach us, even if we're not ready to understand it. Story 19. The Autumn Messenger, October 23rd, 6 years ago, remains etched in my memory. I had just returned from my afternoon university lectures around 11:30, finding our old Victorian house empty and quiet. The autumn air was crisp, fallen leaves dancing across our front porch as I made my way inside. After organizing my class notes, around 2:30, an overwhelming wave of exhaustion washed over me. Being a typical college student, I decided to surrender to the afternoon drowsiness. I set my phone alarm for 20 minutes and settled into my bed, where warm sunlight streamed through the bay window. I fell asleep quickly, but was startled awake after what felt like 5 minutes by my bedroom door creaking open. For a split second, panic gripped me before our golden retriever, River, jumped onto my bed and curled up next to me. Relieved, I drifted back to sleep. Another 5 minutes passed when I suddenly jolted awake again. This time, I was absolutely certain someone was standing beside my bed, behind me. My mind immediately assumed it was my mother, probably annoyed to find me napping in the middle of the day. I awoke and turned around in one fluid motion, ready to defend my impromptu rest, but there was no one there. Confused, I checked my phone. Still 8 minutes remained on my alarm. I tried to go back to sleep, but was awakened by my phone ringing. It was my mother, and her voice carried news that made my blood run cold. My beloved great-aunt Isabella, who had been in the hospital for the past week after a stroke-like episode, had passed away at 1 o'clock. And my mother said something that made the hair on my neck stand up. She knew Aunt Isabella was going to die today, because she had seen a harbinger that very morning. My mother, coming from a long line of Irish mystics, carried with her the old-world beliefs of her homeland. She explained that when she had checked on me early that morning before taking my brother to school, she had seen a tall, dark figure, what the Irish call a fetch, standing next to my bed. My mind suddenly felt like it was short-circuiting. The presence I had felt, my mother's words echoed in my ears as she described her own encounter with the fetch. She told me that in Irish tradition, these spectral visitors often appeared as harbingers of death, warning family members of an impending loss. The terror of understanding crept over me slowly, like frost spreading across a window pane. That presence I had felt wasn't just my imagination or a dream state hallucination. Something had been there, something that existed between the world of the living and the dead, marking the passing of a beloved family member. The experience shook my understanding of reality. I had always considered myself practical, rational someone who looked for logical explanations. But how could I explain this? How could my mother have seen something in my room hours before I felt its presence? Both experiences coinciding with my aunt's passing. Years later, I still find myself wondering about that autumn afternoon, about the thin veil between life and death, and the messengers that might move between these realms. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I remember that presence beside my bed, and I wonder if perhaps there are aspects of existence that our modern minds aren't equipped to fully comprehend. Aunt Isabella used to tell me that there was more mystery in the world than we could ever understand. As a teenager, I would smile politely at what I thought were just the quaint beliefs of an older generation. Now I find myself wondering if she knew more than she let on. If perhaps those old Irish traditions my mother brought with her across the ocean carried deeper truths than I was ready to accept. Story 20. The military museum our family was touring Washington, D.C., and we decided to visit the National Military Museum. The imposing limestone building stood proud against the summer sky, its halls filled with exhibits spanning centuries of military history. Our two boys, Timothy and Andrew, aged 6 and 7, were thrilled about seeing the vintage aircraft and tanks displayed in the courtyard. The museum housed a special World War II memorial exhibition on the 3rd floor. Given the sensitive nature of the content, we decided our boys were too young for that particular exhibit. While my husband Richard went to view it, I stayed outside with the children, trying to keep them entertained in the waiting area. We sat on a wooden bench near the exhibition entrance when suddenly Timothy, my younger son, looked up with worry in his eyes. "Mommy, why is the soldier crying?" he asked. At first, Andrew and I didn't hear anything, but then it reached us, a deep, mournful sound that seemed to float through the air. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a sound of pure anguish that made my skin crawl. The building had a massive rotunda, with sounds typically echoing off the marble floors and granite walls. I tried to rationalize that the acoustics were playing tricks on us, creating this eerie effect. There were easily over 200 visitors that day, their voices bouncing throughout the space. But this crying sound seemed to rise above everything else, cutting through the ambient noise like a knife. The sound wasn't constant, but when it came, it chilled me to my core. I found myself scanning the crowd, trying to spot anyone else reacting to this strange noise. But everyone else seemed oblivious, going about their museum visit as normal. Timothy became increasingly distressed. "Mommy, he won't stop crying," he whispered, clutching my hand tightly. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost oppressive despite the grand, open space around us. When Timothy mentioned needing the bathroom, I seized the opportunity to move away from that spot. We hurried to find facilities on the 3rd floor, eventually discovering a back office, where a kind staff member let us use their private bathroom. The moment we entered that back area, something changed. The air felt dense, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. The hair on my neck stood up, and we all felt it. Whatever was there was incredibly powerful, and it seemed to be following us. Without discussing it, we all knew we needed to leave. We practically ran down to the main floor and out of the building, our footsteps echoing through the halls as we fled. When Richard emerged later, looking for us, we told him about the crying sounds from the memorial exhibit. His face showed confusion. He hadn't heard anything unusual during his entire visit. Later that evening, my curiosity led me to research the building's history. What I discovered sent chills down my spine. According to historical records, the museum building had previously served as a military hospital during World War II, treating thousands of wounded soldiers. The third floor, where we had heard the crying, had been the trauma ward where the most severely injured were treated. The weight of this knowledge settled heavily on me. How many tears of pain and anguish had those walls absorbed? How many young soldiers had spent their final moments in those halls before they housed military artifacts and memorial exhibits? Perhaps what we heard wasn't just an acoustic anomaly. Maybe it was an echo of the building's tragic past, a reminder that sometimes places remember their history in ways we can't fully comprehend. Timothy still occasionally talks about the crying soldier, though years have passed. When he does, I notice Andrew goes quiet, clearly remembering that day. We've visited many museums since then, but we've never experienced anything quite like what we encountered in those halls. Sometimes I wonder if that crying soldier found peace, or if he still wanders those corridors, his sorrow echoing through time, touching the hearts of those who can hear his lament. Story 21. Guardian Eagle. My grandfather was a remarkable man. A retired Navy captain, master woodworker, and dedicated wildlife photographer with a particular passion for birds of prey. His passing changed everything for us, awakening sensitivities I never knew I possessed. Whether dealing with animals or humans, death became a constant companion in my life, teaching me lessons about both endings and beginnings. I've watched life leave the eyes of many beings, my beloved grandfather, countless animals, and even strangers. This particular experience happened when I was 14, just after my grandfather's passing. We received news that his closest friend, who had moved to a remote cabin in Montana to study eagles, had unexpectedly died. That night I had the most vivid dream. I was walking through a mountain meadow, and there stood my grandfather's friend, dressed in his familiar khaki photographer's vest. He was looking through his favorite camera, pointing it toward the sky. When I approached him, he lowered the camera and smiled, saying simply, "Watch the eagles. They'll show you the way." The next morning, my parents and I drove to his cabin to help sort through his belongings. As we approached, we spotted something extraordinary: 3 golden eagles circling the cabin. In all my years accompanying my grandfather and his friend on their photography expeditions, I'd never seen multiple eagles flying together like this. We parked the car, and the eagles landed on 3 separate trees surrounding the cabin, as if they were standing guard. My mother, who had known the friend since childhood, started crying. "He always said the eagles would watch over his home," she whispered. Inside the cabin, we found his camera equipment meticulously organized, along with thousands of photographs. But what caught my attention was his last journal entry, written the day before he died. He described watching an unusual gathering of eagles near his cabin and wrote, "They know something's coming. They always know." As we packed up his belongings, one eagle remained, perched on a dead tree overlooking the cabin. It stayed there all day, watching us work. Just before sunset, as we were preparing to leave, it spread its magnificent wings and soared directly over our heads, so close we could hear the wind through its feathers. That night back at home, I was awakened by a tapping sound on my window. When I looked out, I saw nothing but the moon illuminating the mountains. But there on my windowsill was a single golden eagle feather, an impossible find in our area, hundreds of miles from his cabin. Years later, I became a wildlife photographer myself, specializing in birds of prey. Whenever I'm out in the field, I often feel my grandfather's and his friends' presence, especially when eagles appear. They seem to show up at significant moments, when I'm lost, when I need guidance, or when important decisions loom. The experience taught me that death isn't always an ending. Sometimes it's a transformation, a shift in how souls choose to watch over those they love. My grandfather's friend may have left this world, but through the eagles he so dearly loved, his spirit continues to guide and protect. I keep that eagle feather on my desk now, a reminder that some bonds transcend death. Whether it's through the cry of an eagle or the discovery of an impossible feather, our loved ones find ways to remind us they're still watching, still guiding, still present in ways we might not expect but can certainly feel. Story 22. The Spirit Pack. When I was 13, I woke up one night to the sound of wolves laughing. Living in suburban Oregon, this shouldn't have been possible. We didn't have wolves in our area. I had an 11-year-old brother who often played with the neighbors' dogs. So initially, I dismissed the sound as their nighttime antics. The laughter continued for several nights in a row. Finally annoyed, I told my brother Marcus to stop playing with the dogs at night, threatening to tell our parents if he didn't quiet down. His response sent chills down my spine. He could hear them too, but he wasn't the one making the noise. That night I heard it again. I got up and opened my window, ready to scold my brother and his friends. Instead, what I saw made my blood freeze. Standing in our backyard were the darkest silhouettes I'd ever seen, 4 or 5 of them, about the size of large dogs, but somehow wrong. Their shapes were too fluid, too unnatural. As soon as I screamed, they vanished into the shadows. Dad went outside to investigate, but found nothing. I heard them twice more after that. The first time, I was too terrified to look, and spent the night on the living room couch. The second time, curiosity overcame my fear, and I looked outside again. They were there, more distinct this time. Not quite wolves, not quite dogs, something in between, with forms that seemed to shift and flow like smoke. In a moment of desperate bravado, inspired by horror movies, I grabbed my mother's silver cross necklace, held it up, and shouted, "In the name of all that's holy, I command you to leave and never return." To my amazement, they actually left, though I suspect it was more because they were amused by my theatrical display than actually banished by my improvised exorcism. I could almost hear their laughter fading into the distance as they disappeared. Months later, I learned that our property had once been part of an ancient Native American trading route. Local legends spoke of spirit animals that would guide travelers through the dangerous mountain passes. Some said these spirits took the form of wolves, appearing to lost travelers at night to lead them to safety. Perhaps what I encountered weren't malevolent entities at all, but rather ancient guardians still patrolling their ancestral routes. Their laughter might not have been mocking, but rather an attempt to communicate with a young girl who could somehow sense their presence. Years later, I met an elderly Native American woman at a local historical society meeting. When I shared my story, she smiled knowingly and told me about the shadow walkers, spirit animals that appear to those who have the ability to see between worlds. According to her, their laughter is actually a blessing, a sign that they've accepted you as part of their territory. Now, whenever I hear dogs howling at night, I think back to those shadowy figures in our backyard. I wonder if they're still out there, walking their ancient paths, occasionally revealing themselves to those who can still see them. Maybe my childhood encounter wasn't something to fear after all, but rather a rare glimpse into a world that exists alongside our own world, where spirit animals still roam and ancient magics still hold power. The experience taught me that not everything supernatural is necessarily frightening. Sometimes what appears threatening at first glance might actually be protecting us, watching over us in ways we don't fully understand. Those spectral wolves might have been guardians rather than monsters, their laughter a reminder that the boundary between our world and the spirit world is thinner than we think. Story 23. The mountain cemetery a few months ago. I had what I'd call an enlightening yet terrifying experience. My friend Lauren suggested we explore this supposedly haunted cemetery in the Cascades. The place was remote, nestled high in the mountains where the air is thin and the silence is absolute. We'd heard stories about this cemetery, particularly about a peculiar phenomenon on certain nights. People reported seeing strange lights dancing among the headstones. Lauren, who had always been sensitive to supernatural energy, was especially keen to investigate. We chose a clear night with a full moon, thinking the natural light would help us navigate. Finding the location proved challenging. The cemetery sat at the end of a winding mountain road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. As we drove higher into the mountains, the temperature dropped noticeably, and our cell phone signals disappeared. Around midnight, we finally found the iron gates marking the cemetery's entrance. The moonlight cast long shadows through the ancient pine trees, creating eerie patterns on the weathered headstones. We parked near the entrance and gathered our equipment: flashlights, cameras, and a digital voice recorder. The cemetery itself was smaller than we expected, maybe 50 graves in total, most dating back to the early 1900s. Many belonged to miners who had died in the numerous accidents that plagued the area's gold rush era. The headstones told brief but poignant stories: young men who died in cave-ins, entire families claimed by harsh winters, children lost to diseases long since conquered by modern medicine. As we walked among the graves, Lauren suddenly stopped. Her face went pale and she whispered, "Do you smell that?" I did. A strong scent of pine smoke, as if someone had just lit a fire nearby. But looking around, we saw no signs of flame or smoke. The temperature dropped dramatically, our breath forming clouds in the frigid air. That's when we heard it, the sound of pickaxes striking rock, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond the cemetery's boundaries. The sounds were rhythmic, accompanied by what seemed like distant voices speaking in languages we didn't recognize. Lauren grabbed my arm, pointing to something among the trees. At first, I saw nothing, but then shapes began to emerge from the darkness: translucent figures moving through the cemetery, carrying mining equipment that seemed to glow with a faint blue light. They moved with purpose, as if heading to work a shift that had ended a century ago. We stood frozen, watching as these spectral miners walked past us, through us, completely unaware of our presence. The experience wasn't frightening exactly. It felt more like we had accidentally stumbled onto a scene from the past, a moment in time that kept repeating itself in this remote mountain location. The phenomenon lasted maybe 5 minutes before the figures faded away, taking with them the sounds of mining and the smell of pine smoke. The cemetery returned to its quiet, moonlit state, but something had changed. We felt like we had witnessed something profound, a glimpse into the lives of those who had worked and died in these mountains, their spirits still bound to the daily routines they had known in life. As we made our way back to the car, Lauren noticed something interesting. The dates on many of the headstones matched the time of year we were visiting. Perhaps, she suggested, what we had witnessed wasn't random. Maybe on certain dates, the veil between past and present thins, allowing these echoes of history to play out for those willing to watch and listen. We never returned to that cemetery, but the experience changed how we think about death and what might come after. Those miners didn't seem trapped or suffering. They were simply continuing their work, carrying on in death as they had in life. It made us wonder if perhaps some places hold onto memories so strongly that they continue to replay them, like a film loop that never ends, waiting for an audience to stumble upon their story. Story 24. The shadow figure last winter. I was working late at the university library, a grand old building dating back to the 1890s. The massive reading room was nearly empty. Just me and maybe 2 other students scattered among the towering bookshelves and antique oak tables. Outside, snow fell silently, creating an almost supernatural stillness. Around 11:30, I noticed something odd. The temperature in my corner of the library dropped dramatically, to the point where I could see my breath. This seemed strange since the heating system was usually quite reliable, especially in the winter months. I was deeply focused on my research papers when movement caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just another student walking past, but when I looked up, what I saw made my heart stop. A tall, black figure stood between the bookshelves, maybe 15 feet away. It was completely dark, like a piece of night had taken human form, but somehow darker than the shadows around it. The figure didn't move like a person would. It seemed to shift and flow, as if it were made of smoke, yet maintained a distinctly human shape. What struck me most was its height. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, its head nearly touching the top of the bookshelf. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a shadow from outside, or perhaps my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But then it moved, not walking exactly, but gliding between the shelves. Books began to vibrate and shake as it passed, some even falling to the floor with heavy thuds that echoed through the quiet library. The few other students present seemed oblivious to what was happening. They continued their studies, not even looking up at the sound of falling books. I sat frozen, unable to move or call out, watching as this entity drifted through the stacks. Then it stopped directly across from my table. Although it had no visible face, I could feel it observing me. The air grew even colder, and my laptop screen began to flicker. The figure raised what appeared to be an arm, pointing directly at me. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, but also recognition, as if this entity and I had met before, in some forgotten time or place. Suddenly, the lights in the library flickered, and when they stabilized, the figure was gone. The temperature returned to normal almost immediately. I quickly packed my things and practically ran to the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. The next day, I did some research about the library's history. What I discovered sent chills down my spine. In 1892, during the building's construction, a worker fell to his death from the top of what would become the main reading room. According to newspaper archives, he was described as unusually tall, over 7 feet, and had been working on installing the very bookshelves where I saw the figure. But here's what makes this story truly unsettling. A week after my encounter, I was looking through some old family photographs with my grandmother. She pointed to a faded picture from the 1890s, showing a group of construction workers standing in front of what was clearly the university library being built. Among them stood an extraordinarily tall man, his face serious beneath his worker's cap. "That's your great-great-grandfather," my grandmother said casually. "He helped build that library. Sadly, he died in an accident before it was completed." I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized the truth. The entity in the library hadn't been randomly haunting the stacks. It had been reaching out to its own descendant, perhaps trying to make a connection across the generations. Sometimes, it seems, our ancestors find ways to remind us that they're still watching, still present in the places they helped create. Now when I study in the library late at night, I no longer feel fear when the temperature drops, or when books mysteriously fall from shelves. Instead, I feel a strange sense of protection, knowing that my great-great-grandfather still walks those stacks, watching over his family's newest generation. Growing up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, our family lived in an isolated cabin surrounded by ancient forest. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and the woods were our playground. But there was something about our property that never felt quite right, especially at night. It started with small things. Items would disappear from their usual places, only to turn up in bizarre locations, like finding my mother's reading glasses in the fireplace, or my father's work boots hanging from tree branches. At first, we blamed each other, or our own forgetfulness, but the frequency and strangeness of these occurrences became impossible to ignore. Then the noises began. Late at night, we'd hear what sounded like someone rearranging furniture in the attic. The thing is, our cabin didn't have an attic. The sounds would move across the ceiling, accompanied by heavy footsteps that made the old wooden beams creak and groan. My younger sister, Lily, started talking about the tree people. Shadowy figures, she said, she saw moving through the forest at dusk. We dismissed it as childhood imagination, until the night I saw them too. I was 16, walking back from the shed with firewood, when I noticed movement among the trees. 3 tall, impossibly thin figures weaved between the trunks, their movements fluid and inhuman. When I blinked, they vanished. The incidents escalated during the winter months. One particularly cold night, we were all sitting around the fireplace when every window in the house suddenly frosted over. Not from the outside in, but from the inside out, as if something cold was breathing on them from within our home. The patterns weren't random. They formed intricate symbols that none of us recognized. My father, ever the skeptic, finally acknowledged something was wrong when his prized hunting rifles, always kept meticulously clean and organized, were found one morning arranged in a perfect circle in the front yard, each one pointing toward the center. There was no snow on them despite the recent snowfall, and none of our footprints led to or from the circle. The local historian we consulted told us our land had once been sacred to the native tribes who lived there centuries ago. They believed the forest was home to nature spirits who acted as guardians of the land. These spirits, according to legend, would play tricks on human inhabitants to remind them they were guests in the forest's domain. Things came to a head during a severe thunderstorm. Lightning had knocked out our power, and we were huddled in the living room with candles when my sister screamed, pointing to the window. There, illuminated by lightning flashes, stood dozens of the shadow figures surrounding our cabin. They swayed in perfect unison, though there was no wind. That's when my mother did something unexpected. She walked to the front door, opened it, and spoke into the darkness. "We mean no harm to this land or its guardians. We ask for your blessing to remain here in peace." The shadow figures stopped moving. One stepped forward taller than the others, its form seeming to shift between human and tree. It raised what might have been an arm, pointing first at my mother, then at the ground. The message was clear: respect the land and we could stay. From that night on, things changed. The tricks and disturbances stopped, though we'd occasionally catch glimpses of the shadows moving through the trees. They seemed to watch over us, now rather than intimidate us. Lost items would mysteriously return to their proper places, and during particularly harsh storms, we'd find our cabin somehow protected from damage while neighboring properties suffered. We came to understand that we weren't just living in a house in the woods. We were sharing space with ancient guardians who had watched over these mountains long before humans built their homes there. They hadn't been trying to frighten us away. They were teaching us to respect the land we lived on. Now, years later, when I visit my parents' cabin, I still feel those presences in the forest. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'll sit on the porch and watch the shadows dance between the trees, no longer afraid but grateful for their strange and ancient guardianship. As a nurse at Riverside General for 15 years, I've seen my fair share of unusual occurrences, but nothing compares to what happens in room 412. It's not really just a room. It's a 4-bed unit used for higher acuity patients, complete with advanced monitoring equipment and a dedicated nursing station. The first sign that something was different about this unit came from the call system. The emergency call light would activate itself when no one was in the room. Our biomedical team checked the system multiple times, even completely replaced it, but the phantom calls continued. Equipment would mysteriously malfunction, and personal items belonging to staff would vanish, only to appear in odd places within the unit. But the most unsettling incidents involved the temperature. Patients would request transfers out of the room because, regardless of the thermostat setting, certain areas would become inexplicably cold. We're not talking about slight temperature variations. Patients could see their breath in these cold spots, even during the height of summer. One night, while doing my rounds, I experienced something that still gives me chills. I was checking on Mrs. Henderson, an elderly patient with dementia, when she suddenly became agitated. She pointed toward the door and asked me to close it because of that tall doctor in the old uniform who keeps watching her. I glanced at the doorway, but saw nothing. Still, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt an unmistakable presence. The air grew heavy, and the monitoring equipment began to behave erratically, showing impossible vital signs before shutting down completely. Later that week, during another night shift, I was at the nurse's station when I heard footsteps in the empty unit. These weren't the usual sounds of a busy hospital. These were deliberate, measured steps, like someone doing rounds in heavy boots. When I went to investigate, I found all the monitoring equipment turned off, the chairs rearranged, and a strong scent of antiseptic that hadn't been used in hospitals for decades. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started researching the hospital's history. During World War II, this wing had served as a military hospital ward. Room 412 had been the trauma unit, where the most severely wounded soldiers were treated. An old photograph showed the room exactly as it was now. Except for one detail standing in the corner was a tall military doctor in a period uniform, his face stern but kind. The more I dug, the more I discovered. This doctor, Major William Harrison, was known for his dedication to his patients. He worked tirelessly, often staying long after his shifts ended, checking on his patients throughout the night. According to hospital records, he died of exhaustion in 1944, found slumped over a patient's bed during his rounds. The strange occurrences began to make sense. The phantom call lights, the moving equipment, the temperature changes. These weren't random paranormal events. They were the actions of a dedicated doctor, still trying to care for his patients. One particularly busy night, when we were short-staffed and overwhelmed, something remarkable happened. I was rushing to respond to multiple calls when I felt a gentle but firm hand on my shoulder, guiding me toward room 412. There, I found a patient in the early stages of cardiac arrest, something I might have missed if I hadn't been directed there at that exact moment. As I called the code and began emergency procedures, I caught a glimpse of someone in the corner of my eye, a tall figure in an old military uniform, nodding approvingly before fading away. Thanks to the early intervention, the patient survived. Now, when new staff members complain about the strange occurrences in room 412, I tell them not to worry. I explain that we have an extra set of eyes watching over our patients, a dedicated physician who takes his oath to do no harm. So seriously that not even death could stop him from making his rounds. The call lights still go off occasionally, and equipment still gets mysteriously rearranged. But I've come to see these as helpful hints rather than haunting incidents. Sometimes, late at night, when the ward is quiet, I'll whisper a thank you to Major Harrison. The room will grow slightly cooler, and I'll know he heard me still on duty, still watching over his patients, long after his final rounds should have ended. The moment we moved into the old Thornhill Manor, I knew something was different about this house. Built in 1875, it stood 3 stories tall, with sweeping verandas and intricate gingerbread trim that spoke of a more elegant era. The real estate agent called it a steal too good to pass up for a growing family looking for their forever home. The previous owners had modernized the kitchen and bathrooms, but the rest of the house retained its Victorian charm. Elaborate crown moldings, pocket doors, and original hardwood floors that creaked with every step. My husband Thomas loved its character. Our teenage daughter Emma was thrilled to have the entire third floor to herself, and even our cat Sebastian seemed to settle in quickly. But from the first night, strange things began happening. It started with the music. Late at night, we'd hear what sounded like a piano playing from the formal parlor. The melody was always the same, a haunting waltz that seemed to float through the house. The thing is, we didn't own a piano. When we investigated the parlor, we'd find it empty and silent, though the room would be inexplicably cold, and the chandelier crystals would still be swaying slightly, as if disturbed by dancers we couldn't see. Emma swore she sometimes saw the shadow of a woman in a full-skirted dress twirling past the doorway, but we initially dismissed it as teenage imagination. Then the mirrors began to show inconsistencies. You'd catch glimpses of furniture that wasn't there, or see people walking through rooms behind you that were actually empty. Once, while cleaning the massive gilt-framed mirror in the entry hall, I distinctly saw a formal dinner party reflected in it. Ladies in bustled dresses, men in tailcoats, all enjoying what appeared to be an elegant evening soiree. When I turned around, the hall was empty, but the scent of gardenias and cigar smoke lingered in the air. Objects would move on their own, but not in a threatening way. Lost items would appear neatly arranged on the hall table. Dusty surfaces would mysteriously become clean, and fresh flowers would appear in vases we hadn't filled. It was as if the house had its own housekeeper that we couldn't see. The local historical society provided some interesting information. The house had been built by the Thornhill family, who were known for their lavish parties and musical evenings. Elizabeth Thornhill, the lady of the house, was apparently a gifted pianist who loved to entertain. She died in 1901, but according to legend, she loved the house so much that she never really left. Things came to a head during a severe thunderstorm that knocked out our power. As we sat in the dark living room with candles, the piano music began again, louder than ever. This time, rather than investigating, I did something different. I walked to the parlor doorway and said quietly, "Thank you for sharing your beautiful music with us, Mrs. Thornhill. You have a lovely home." The music stopped mid-note. Then, to our amazement, the candles in the parlor's silver candlesticks lit themselves one by one, illuminating the room with a warm glow. In the mirror above the fireplace, I caught a clear glimpse of a beautiful woman in a purple silk dress, sitting at a grand piano that wasn't there. She smiled, nodded once, and faded away. From that night on, the house felt different, not less active, but more harmonious. The piano music became a regular evening occurrence, like a private concert for the family. Lost items would be returned more quickly, and on particularly cold nights, we'd often find the fireplaces mysteriously lit and warming the rooms. Emma started leaving sheet music on the hall table, and we'd hear Mrs. Thornhill practicing the new pieces. Sebastian, the cat, developed a habit of purring at empty chairs, as if receiving invisible pets. Even Thomas, the skeptic, admitted there was something special about our home. We've lived here for 5 years now, and we've come to see Mrs. Thornhill not as a ghost, but as part of the family, a gracious Victorian lady who simply loves her home too much to leave it. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, we'll sit in the parlor and listen to her play. the music of another era filling our home with its gentle beauty. After all, we're not just living in a house. We're sharing a home with its original mistress, who still takes pride in maintaining its warmth and welcome. It's taught us that not all hauntings are frightening. Sometimes, they're just reminders that love for a place can transcend time itself. It was just another ordinary Tuesday when I went to bed in my apartment near the university. The autumn wind rattled the windows, and rain tapped gently against the glass. I drifted off to sleep easily, but what happened next would change my understanding of reality forever. In my dream, I found myself walking through my grandmother's old house, a place I hadn't visited in years. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. The faded wallpaper with tiny roses, the creaky wooden floors, the smell of fresh-baked bread that always seemed to linger in the air. But something felt different. Standing in the kitchen was an elderly woman I'd never seen before. She wore a simple blue dress and a white apron, her silver hair tied back in a neat bun. She was making tea, using my grandmother's old copper kettle. When she turned to face me, her eyes held a wisdom that seemed ancient and somehow familiar. Finally, she said, smiling warmly, "I've been trying to reach you for weeks." I knew I was dreaming, but everything felt extraordinarily vivid. The steam rising from the kettle, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, even the warmth of the sunlight streaming through the windows. It all felt more real than any dream I'd ever had. She gestured for me to sit at the kitchen table, placing a cup of tea before me. "Your grandmother asked me to find you," she said matter-of-factly. "She has a message." My grandmother had passed away 3 months ago, and her loss still felt raw. The woman must have seen the pain in my eyes, because she reached across the table and patted my hand. Her touch felt solid, real. "In the attic of her house," the woman continued, "behind the old steamer trunk, there's a wooden box. Inside are letters she wrote to you during her last months. She wants you to find them." I wanted to ask more questions, but the dream began to fade. The last thing I saw was the woman's kind smile as she said, "Don't forget the copper kettle." I woke up with my heart pounding. The dream had been so vivid that I could still smell the tea. I tried to dismiss it, but something kept nagging at me. That afternoon, I drove to my grandmother's house, which was still being prepared for sale. Using my key, I went inside and climbed to the attic. Everything was exactly as it had been in my dream. Behind the steamer trunk, partially hidden by old curtains, was a wooden box I'd never noticed before. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to me, written in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. They were dated from her last months, each one filled with stories, advice, and memories she wanted to share with me. But what made my blood run cold was the last item in the box, the copper kettle from my dream, wrapped carefully in an old tea towel. I sat there in the dusty attic, holding the kettle, when I noticed something engraved on its bottom. "Property of Margaret Wells, 1922. I later learned that Margaret Wells had been the previous owner of the house, a woman known in the community for her ability to communicate through dreams. The letters turned out to be a precious gift, filled with family history and wisdom my grandmother hadn't been able to share before her passing. She wrote about her own experiences with Margaret Wells, who had appeared in her dreams too, serving as a messenger between this world and the next. In the final letter, my grandmother wrote about arranging for Margaret to find me, knowing she would need help delivering her last messages. She described Margaret exactly as I had seen her in my dream, right down to the blue dress and white apron. Now, years later, I keep the copper kettle on my stove. Sometimes, when I'm making tea late at night, I catch a whiff of that distinctive blend from my dream. In those moments, I wonder if Margaret is still out there, moving between dreams, helping others bridge the gap between this world and the next. I've learned that sometimes the most important messages come to us in unexpected ways, and that love, whether from family or kind strangers, can transcend even the boundaries between life and death. Every time I use that kettle, I'm reminded that some dreams are more than just dreams. They're bridges to the people we've lost, carried by messengers who understand that death isn't always the end of the conversation. Story 29. The lighthouse keeper's voice. I took the job as assistant lighthouse keeper on Ravens Point last September. The isolation didn't bother me. After years in the city, I was looking forward to the solitude. The lighthouse itself was a beautiful structure, built in 1887, standing sentinel over treacherous rocks that had claimed countless ships before its construction. The head keeper, Old Jack, had maintained the lighthouse for 30 years. He was a quiet man with weather-worn features, who seemed to communicate more through gesture than words. During my orientation, he showed me the daily routines: maintaining the lamp, recording weather conditions, and keeping the brass work polished. "One more thing," he said, as we finished the tour. "If you hear singing at night, just let it be." Before I could ask what he meant, he changed the subject to generator maintenance. The first few weeks passed uneventfully. I settled into the rhythm of lighthouse life, learning to read the moods of the sea and sky. Then came the storm season, and with it the singing. I first heard it during a particularly violent November gale. The wind howled around the tower, and waves crashed against the rocks below. Through the storm's fury came a woman's voice, clear as a bell, singing what sounded like an old Celtic lament. The melody seemed to weave through the wind, haunting and beautiful. Following the sound, I climbed to the gallery deck. There in the driving rain, I saw her, a figure in a long dress, looking out to sea. Before I could speak, she turned slightly, and I realized I could see straight through her to the raging ocean beyond. The next morning, I asked Jack about what I'd seen. He nodded slowly, pouring us both coffee. "That's Margaret," he said. "She was the first keeper's wife. Story goes, she used to sing to guide ships away from the rocks during storms, before we had the foghorn. One night in 1892, she saw a ship in trouble. She stood out there singing, trying to warn them off the rocks, until the cold and wet took her. But she never really left. As winter deepened, I heard Margaret's voice more often, always during storms, always singing the same mournful melody. One particularly brutal night, our modern foghorn malfunctioned. As Jack and I worked frantically to repair it, Margaret's song rang out clearer than I'd ever heard it before. Through the driving snow, we spotted running lights. A fishing boat had strayed too close to the rocks. With our foghorn dead, they had no warning of the danger. But they must have heard something, because the boat suddenly turned sharply away from the rocks. finding safe passage through the channel. When we finally got the horn working again, Jack looked at me with knowing eyes. "She's still doing her job," he said quietly. "Still protecting them." Over the months, I came to see Margaret not as a ghost, but as another keeper of the light. During fierce storms, we'd hear her singing from the gallery deck, her voice carrying over the waves like an ethereal foghorn. Sometimes, in the lighthouse log, I'd find whether observations written in elegant Victorian handwriting that neither Jack nor I had made. One morning, after a particularly bad storm, I found an entry from 1892 in Margaret's hand. "The sea holds both beauty and danger. We who keep the light must remember this always." Below it, in fresh ink, was written, "Still true after all these years. Now when I hear singing during storms, I feel a sense of comfort rather than fear. Margaret remains at her post, as dedicated in death as she was in life." The rocks below the lighthouse still claim debris from the angry sea, but no ships have been lost here since she began her eternal watch. Some nights, when the wind howls and the waves crash, I stand at the gallery rail beside her invisible form. Together, we watch over the dark waters, one keeper in flesh and blood, one in spirit, both dedicated to keeping safe those who travel these treacherous waters. Jack retired last month, but before he left, he told me something that gave me chills. "You know," he said, "in all my years here, Margaret only lets herself be seen by those she trusts to help her keep the light. Guess you're one of us now." I still hear her singing on storm-tossed nights, her voice a reminder that some duties transcend even death. In this lonely lighthouse on Raven's Point, I've learned that not all ghosts are to be feared. Some are simply dedicated souls, continuing their life's work long after their lives have ended. Story 30. The strange noise. I was home alone on a regular Wednesday night, sitting in our century-old farmhouse, working on my laptop. The autumn wind whistled through the old oak trees outside, their branches casting dancing shadows on the walls. At first, everything seemed normal, just another quiet evening in our rural neighborhood. Around 10:30, I heard it, a peculiar scratching sound coming from somewhere in the house. Having grown up in old houses, I was familiar with their usual creaks and groans, but this was different. It sounded deliberate, almost rhythmic, like someone slowly dragging their fingernails across wood. Initially, I blamed our cat, Midnight, but then remembered she was staying at the vet's after a minor surgery. The sound continued, growing more distinct. It seemed to be coming from the direction of our formal dining room, a place we rarely used except for holidays. Setting aside my laptop, I walked toward the sound. The dining room was dark, moonlight filtering through the lace curtains, creating strange patterns on the antique table. The scratching stopped the moment I entered the room, but the air felt different, heavier somehow, and noticeably colder than the rest of the house. I switched on the light, half expecting to find a raccoon had somehow gotten in. The room was empty, but something caught my eye. The china cabinet, which had belonged to my grandmother, stood with one door slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered closing both doors that morning while dusting. As I moved to close it, the scratching sound started again, this time from inside the cabinet. My hand froze on the doorknob. Through the glass, I could see our family's collection of antique china, passed down through generations. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the scratching continued. Taking a deep breath, I opened the cabinet door wider. The sound stopped immediately, but what I saw made my blood run cold. On the back panel of the cabinet, where there had only been smooth wood that morning, were fresh scratch marks, 3 parallel lines, about 6 inches long. While I stood there trying to make sense of what I was seeing, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. My breath came out in visible puffs, despite it being a mild autumn night. Then I noticed something else. The scratch marks were slowly extending themselves, as if an invisible hand was dragging its nails across the wood. I backed away, my heart pounding. The scratching sound resumed, louder now, accompanied by a soft, almost inaudible humming. It took me a moment to recognize the melody. An old lullaby my grandmother used to sing while arranging her beloved china. Instead of running, which every instinct screamed at me to do, I found myself saying, "Grandma." "Is that you?" The scratching stopped. The teacups on the middle shelf began to gently rattle, and then, one by one, rearranged themselves into perfect symmetrical patterns. Something my grandmother had always insisted upon, but I had never quite managed to replicate. A warm, familiar scent filled the air, cinnamon and vanilla, just like my grandmother's kitchen. The temperature gradually returned to normal, and I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder, like someone giving me a reassuring pat. The next morning, I called my mother to tell her what happened. She was quiet for a moment before saying, "You know, it's the anniversary of when your grandmother first got that china set. She always said it was her proudest possession after her family. I still hear the scratching sometimes, always when the china cabinet needs straightening or dusting. I've learned to recognize it as a gentle reminder rather than something frightening. The scratch marks remain on the back panel of the cabinet. My grandmother's way, I suppose, of letting me know that she's still here, still caring for her treasured china, still watching over her family. Now when I hear that familiar sound, I often find myself humming her old lullaby as I rearrange the teacups just the way she liked them. Sometimes, if I listen carefully, I can hear her humming along with me, her presence a comforting reminder that love doesn't end when someone leaves this world. It just finds new ways to express itself. Story 31. The dark entity. It started the night of a terrible thunderstorm. I was alone in my apartment, trying to focus on grading papers. I teach high school English when the power went out. The sudden darkness didn't bother me at first. I lit some candles and continued working by their flickering light. That's when I felt it, a presence so heavy it seemed to press the air from my lungs. The temperature in my study dropped dramatically, and the candle flames began to dance erratically, though there was no draft. In the corner of my eye, I caught movement, a shadow darker than the darkness around it. When I turned to look directly at it, the shadow seemed to grow, taking on a vaguely humanoid shape. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and seemed to absorb what little light there was in the room. The entity had no distinct features, but I could feel it watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. My first instinct was to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I sat frozen in my chair as the shadow figure glided closer. The air grew colder with each foot it advanced, until I could see my breath misting in front of me. The candles flickered wildly, then went out one by one, though there was still no wind. Just as panic began to overwhelm me, something unexpected happened. My cat, Oscar, who usually hid during storms, calmly walked into the room. He sat directly between me and the shadow figure, his tail wrapped neatly around his paws, and began to purr loudly. The entity stopped its advance. For a long moment, it seemed to study Oscar, who continued purring as if nothing unusual was happening. Then, to my amazement, the shadow figure began to shrink, its form becoming less threatening, more human-sized. That's when I noticed something odd about its movements. They seemed hesitant, almost uncertain. Acting on an instinct I couldn't explain, I found my voice and asked, "Are you lost?" The shadow shifted, and though it had no face, I sensed surprise in its posture. The oppressive feeling in the room lifted slightly. Encouraged, I continued speaking. "It's okay. You don't have to be afraid." The entity drifted closer, but this time it didn't feel threatening. Oscar's purring grew louder, and he moved to rub against the shadow's base, passing right through it. To my astonishment, where the cat touched the shadow, small points of light appeared, like stars in a dark sky. Gradually, as Oscar continued his interaction with the entity, more lights appeared within its form. They began to arrange themselves, forming a pattern that looked almost like a constellation. I recognized it. It was Orion, my father's favorite constellation. He had taught me to find it in the night sky when I was a child, before he passed away. "Dad," I whispered, hardly daring to believe. The shadow figure brightened slightly, and I felt a wave of familiar warmth wash over me. The same feeling I used to get when my father hugged me. The entity reached out what might have been a hand, and for a brief moment, I felt a gentle touch on my cheek. Then the power came back on, flooding the room with light. When my eyes adjusted, the shadow figure was gone, but Oscar sat contentedly in the spot where it had been, still purring. On my desk, my father's old constellation map, which I kept as a memento, but hadn't looked at in years, had somehow moved from its usual place in the drawer to lie open, showing the page with Orion. Since that night, the shadow figure has returned several times, always during storms. It no longer feels threatening. Instead, its presence brings a sense of comfort and protection. Oscar always greets it like an old friend, and sometimes I catch glimpses of constellation patterns forming within its darkness. I've come to understand that what initially seemed terrifying was simply my father's spirit, trying to find a way to reach me. He appears as a shadow because that's the only form he can take, but the love and warmth he brought to my life still shine through, like stars in the darkness. Now when storms come and the lights go out, I welcome the familiar chill in the air and the darkening of the shadows in the corner. My father's presence reminds me that love transcends death, finding ways to bridge the gap between this world and the next, even if those ways sometimes appear frightening at first glance. Story 32. The mirror's memory, my grandmother's Victorian mirror, had always been a centerpiece in our family home. Standing 8 feet tall, its ornate gold frame decorated with carved roses and vines, it had witnessed over a century of our family's history. When I inherited the house after my parents' passing, the mirror was one of the few original pieces I kept. I never expected it to show me anything other than my own reflection, until that rainy April evening. I was walking past it, carrying a box of old photographs I'd found in the attic, when movement in the mirror caught my eye. But it wasn't my reflection I saw. Instead, the mirror showed a scene from what appeared to be the 1890s. A young woman in a high-necked blue dress stood in what was clearly my living room, but furnished as it had been over a century ago. She was arranging flowers in a crystal vase, humming softly to herself. The scene was as clear as a photograph, yet moving like a film. When I turned to look at the actual room behind me, it was empty and modern. But in the mirror, the past continued to play out. Fascinated, I set down the box and watched. The woman looked familiar somehow. It took me a moment to realize she resembled the young version of my great-grandmother Emma, whose photograph I had just been looking at in the attic. As I watched, she finished with the flowers and walked to the my mirror, to adjust her hair. For a brief moment, our eyes met in the reflection. She showed no surprise at seeing me, only smiled gently and nodded, as if greeting a familiar friend. Then the image began to fade, the Victorian room dissolving back into my modern-day reflection. Over the next few weeks, I discovered that the mirror didn't just show random scenes from the past. It seemed to replay significant moments in my family's history. I saw my grandmother as a young bride, twirling in her wedding dress before this very mirror. I witnessed my father as a small boy, playing with his toy soldiers on the rug, while my grandfather read the evening paper. Each scene was crystal clear, complete with sounds and even scents from the past. When my great-grandmother appeared again, I could smell her signature lavender perfume. During a scene from the 1920s, jazz music played faintly in the background as my grandmother and her sisters practiced dance steps in their flapper dresses. The most extraordinary event happened during a thunderstorm that knocked out our power. By candlelight, I saw the mirror begin to glow softly. In its depths, I watched a scene I recognized from family stories. The night my great-grandfather announced he'd finally saved enough money to buy the house. The family gathered in the parlor, celebrating with champagne, their joy palpable even across the decades. But it was what happened next that took my breath away. As I watched, my great-grandmother Emma turned toward the mirror and spoke directly to me. "We've been waiting for you to see us, dear. Someone needs to remember." She walked closer to the mirror's surface, her image becoming clearer. This house, this mirror, they hold our family's memories. We've watched over it, waiting for someone who could see. You have the gift, just as I did. I learned that Emma had been the first to discover the mirror's power, and she had used it to record our family's history in a unique way. The mirror didn't just reflect light, it captured moments, preserving them like insects in amber for future generations to witness. Now I spend my evenings by the mirror, watching our family's story unfold. I've seen celebrations and sorrows, triumphs and losses, all the moments that shaped who we are. Sometimes, when the light is just right, I catch glimpses of my parents as young lovers, or my grandparents dancing in the parlor. I've started keeping a journal of everything I see, preserving our history in words as the mirror preserves it in reflections. Emma appears occasionally, offering guidance and sharing stories that were never written down. Through the mirror, our family's past remains alive, not just as faded photographs or second-hand stories, but as vivid, living memories. The mirror has taught me that time isn't as linear as we think. Sometimes it pools and eddies like water, and if you know where to look, and have the gift to see, you can glimpse other moments, other times, flowing alongside our own. Our ancestors aren't as far away as we might think. They're just on the other side of the glass, watching, remembering, waiting for someone to see them again. I took a job as a night security guard at Riverside Academy, a prestigious private school housed in a building that dated back to 1875. The massive Gothic structure, with its towering spires and endless corridors, had originally been a boarding school for girls. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., patrolling the empty halls and making sure all was secure. The other guards had warned me about the third floor. Just do a quick walkthrough and don't linger, they said. They told me about strange sounds, unexplained footsteps, and doors that would lock and unlock themselves. I dismissed their stories as typical night shift superstition. My first few weeks were uneventful. The building creaked and settled as old buildings do, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then one night, while doing my routine check of the third floor, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. The sound of chalk writing on a blackboard. Following the sound, I found myself outside room 307. The door was closed, but light spilled out from beneath it. I knew all the classrooms should be dark at this hour. When I opened the door, the room was empty and dark. Yet the ancient blackboard was covered in fresh chalk, writing mathematical equations that slowly faded as I watched. I wrote it off as exhaustion playing tricks on my mind, but the incidents continued. Sometimes I'd hear a girl's voice reciting Latin conjugations, or the scratch of pen nibs on paper. Occasionally, I'd catch the scent of ink and chalk dust in empty classrooms, or find textbooks open to random pages when I was certain they'd been closed during my previous round. The pivotal moment came during a severe thunderstorm. The power had gone out, and I was using my flashlight to navigate the third floor corridor. As lightning illuminated the hallway through the tall windows, I saw her, a young girl in a high-necked Victorian dress, sitting at one of the old desks that lined the hall. She looked solid, real, until my flashlight beam passed through her. She turned to face me, and I saw she was holding a slate and chalk. "I have to finish my lessons," she said softly. "Miss Adelaide says I'm not ready for the examination yet." Instead of running, I found myself asking, "What examination?" "Latin," she replied, her face troubled. "I must pass to graduate, but," she faltered, then looked at me pleadingly. "Would you help me study? No one else can see me anymore." Over the next few weeks during my rounds, I'd stop at that desk and help her with Latin. I'd learned it in college, and though rusty, I remembered enough to assist with basic translations. She told me her name was Emily, and she'd been a student at the school in 1878. She'd fallen ill with fever just before her final examinations and never recovered. "I just wanted to finish," she explained, "to make my family proud." So I stayed. We worked together every night, going through declensions and conjugations. She was a quick learner, and soon she was teaching me things I'd forgotten. Other spirits began to appear, other students, and eventually Miss Adelaide herself, a stern-looking woman who nonetheless smiled approvingly at Emily's progress. One night, after successfully translating a particularly difficult passage from Virgil, Emily's face lit up with joy. "I think I'm ready now," she said. The next moment, Miss Adelaide appeared beside her desk. "Indeed you are, my dear," the teacher said warmly. "You've more than earned your graduation." Emily stood, gathering her slate and books. "Thank you," she said to me, her form beginning to fade. "I couldn't have done it without your help." Then both she and Miss Adelaide vanished, leaving behind only a faint scent of chalk dust. The third floor is quieter now, though not entirely empty. Sometimes I still hear chalk on blackboards or pages turning in empty rooms. Occasionally, new spirits appear, students who need help with one last lesson, or teachers with one last class to teach. I've learned that not all hauntings are born of tragedy or unfinished business. Sometimes spirits linger simply because they love learning so much that not even death can stop them from pursuing knowledge. Now, when I patrol the third floor at night, I carry Latin textbooks with me, ready to help the next student who needs just a little more time to complete their studies. Story 15. The last message. My father passed away this past winter. He was my hero, a retired Air Force colonel who had an incredible passion for wildlife photography, especially birds of prey. He was known for his mischievous sense of humor and his legendary cooking skills, always insisting that everything needed just a touch more black pepper. After his death, I took on the responsibility of maintaining his rural property and caring for his animals until we could find them new homes. His 3 dogs and small flock of chickens needed daily attention. One afternoon, my stepbrother Nathan came to keep me company. We built a fire in the backyard pit, opened a few beers, and started sharing memories. Halfway through our conversation, something extraordinary happened. A majestic golden eagle swooped down, flying impossibly close, barely 6 feet above our heads. This wasn't a hunting dive. There was no prey in sight. The bird seemed to deliberately fly low, as if ensuring we noticed its presence, before disappearing into the tree line. Dad had spent countless hours photographing these eagles. I knew in my heart this was his way of checking in on us. Later, when Nathan had left, I was walking through the house when something peculiar occurred. There's a back door leading directly into the kitchen, with Dad's favorite spice rack mounted beside it. As I opened the door, a single container of black peppercorns launched itself off the shelf, landing about 4 feet away. None of the other spices moved, just the pepper, Dad's signature seasoning. That night I poured myself a generous measure of Dad's favorite bourbon, then another, and another. In my drunken state, I found myself in the backyard, crying beneath the stars, howling at the moon, pouring out everything I wished I'd said to him while I had the chance. The next morning, nursing a wicked hangover, I stumbled into the kitchen to find one of the mousetraps perfectly balanced on its edge, something physically impossible without intervention. Somehow, I knew Dad had heard every word of my emotional outburst. During the house cleanout, I came across my father's masterpiece, an antique pendulum clock he had lovingly restored, crafting a custom wooden case for it. The clock hadn't worked since my stepmother's passing, despite repeated attempts by Dad, me, and my brother to repair it. Though beautiful, we had decided to donate it since it wouldn't run. I carefully removed it from the wall and placed it on the front porch, ready for donation. Suddenly, the clock started ticking. My wife's jaw dropped, and shivers ran down both our spines. It was Dad's way of saying, "Don't you dare give away my clock." It now hangs in my living room, keeping perfect time. 6 months after his passing, we returned to the farm to scatter his ashes. The next morning, as we were preparing to leave, something remarkable appeared. A magnificent red-tailed hawk, Dad's favorite bird to photograph, landed on the old fence post where he used to set up his camera. The bird studied us intently, tilted its head in an almost human-like gesture, then spread its wings and soared away over the meadow, where Dad had spent so many hours waiting for the perfect shot. Just as we thought the morning's magic was complete, we heard a distinct whistle, Dad's special call that he used to summon his dogs. All 3 of his elderly dogs, now living with different family members, but visiting for the ash scattering, suddenly perked up their ears and ran to the spot where they used to meet him every morning. These experiences have taught me that the bonds of love truly can transcend death. My father, ever the practical joker and natural teacher, found ways to let us know he's still watching over us, through his beloved birds of prey, his cherished pepper, his restored clock, and even through the memories of his faithful dogs. Sometimes the most convincing evidence of the supernatural isn't in dramatic manifestations, but in these small, perfectly personalized messages that could only come from someone who knows us completely. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.